So this quick video looks at the issue of customer classification. When we run projects to improve profitability of businesses, one of the first exercises we do is to look at existing customers to try and understand who buys what, when and why. A typical analysis would see three groups. The A's, big spenders, they buy a lot and they buy often. Typically they expect a great service with added value in ideas and knowledge and advice. They may want better payment terms. However, they also understand the rules of business and they negotiate hard but are prepared to pay a fair price. At the other end of the spectrum are the C's. They buy little, they buy infrequently, they're often price sensitive, whether that's because they don't value things or because they have limited resources, and they can be surprisingly demanding. The middle ground, the B's, typical customers. They buy regularly, they buy a reasonable amount of stuff and they pay a good price. They're often loyal and they want to be looked after and appreciated, and they want the right products at the right time. That the A's group was just 5% of customers by number, but accounted for 66% of total turnover. The B's were around 45% of all customers by number and only 32% of total turnover, which means the C's were almost half of all customers but reflected just 2% of turnover. Now, basic common sense would suggest that 2% of turnover from half your customers is a bad idea, but as business consultants, we want to prove that. So we analyse profit margins, we look at the transaction cost from small transactions as opposed to large transactions, we look at allocating the overheads across each of those three categories of customers to identify how much money we make from each group. What we saw in this case, and it's a very similar story in many other projects that we run, was that the A group generated most of the profits, around 80% of the bottom line. The B group accounted for around 35% of total profits. Now obviously that adds up to 115%, more than the reported profit. The reason, of course, is that the business was losing money on the C group. About 15% of the profits generated by the A's and B's was subsidising the C's. This is often the case in many businesses, but it's not until you identify three sensible categories and crunch the numbers that you can see it. Most businesses look at customers as one lump, they look at turnover as a single figure, and they don't have that data. So once you know that information, what should you do? The first and most important task is to make sure that your A customers stick around. Pick up the phone more often, go and see them more often, make sure they feel valued and appreciated. In my experience, these customers are assumed to be happy because they keep coming back and spending money, and as a result, they're often taken for granted. But you can guarantee your customers are being approached by your competitors all the time. One mistake and you could lose that account. The second task is to address the C problem. What can you do to change the profitability of that relationship? You could set minimum order quantities to make transactions more efficient and effective. You could remove credit facilities so that you don't have to finance their credit and or reduce the risk of bad debts. In reality, you will probably need to address price or limit the discounts that you give that group. You've got to get the margins up from those customers. And if they don't like it, you're losing a customer that currently costs you money to serve. Still a win. Finally, you may just have to tell them you no longer want their business. Now imagine for a moment all of your C-grade customers don't accept the new terms. They leave. Your turnover would drop by about 2%. Your profits would go up as your A's and B's are no longer subsidising that group. But more important than that, how much time and resource would you liberate to spend time loving your A customers to death, cultivating your relationships with your B customers, and hunting for more of each of those two categories? So why don't you do a customer classification exercise on your business? Who are your A's, B's and C's? What actions should you be taking to lock in the A's, cultivate the B's and remove the C's? If you're not sure where to start, give us a call. We would be delighted to help.